1932. The Great Depression. Across America, the greatest mansions ever built are falling like dominoes. On Fifth Avenue in New York, Cornelius Vanderbilt's palace is demolished to make room for a department store. On Long Island, Idle Hour, once a symbol of unstoppable wealth, sits abandoned, windows shattered, waiting for the wrecking ball. In Newport, Rhode Island, the Breakers, 70 rooms of Italian marble and gold can barely afford to keep the lights on. Over 600 Gilded Age estates will be destroyed between 1900 and 1950. Palaces that took years to build, gone in weeks. Marble sold for scrap. Ballrooms turned into parking lots. But in the mountains of North Carolina, one mansion refuses to fall. Biltmore, 250 rooms, the largest private home ever built in America. And standing in its library, surrounded by 10,000 books and the weight of an impossible dream, is a 60-year-old widow named Edith Vanderbilt. She's about to do something no one in her family has ever done. She's about to open the doors to strangers, not because she wants to, because it's the only way to save what her husband built. This is the story of how Biltmore survived when every other mansion fell. It's a story about the fragile line between vision and excess, about architectural ambition becoming both legacy and burden, about private opulence transforming into public heritage, not by choice but by necessity. It's about what we choose to save and what it costs to keep beauty alive. But to understand how Biltmore survived, we have to go back to the beginning, to Christmas Eve, 1895, to a man who believed beauty could outlast the fortune that created it. If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. December 24th, 1895. Asheville, North Carolina. Snow falls softly on the Blue Ridge Mountains. Inside the largest private home in America, candles flicker in every window. George Washington Vanderbilt III stands alone in the banquet hall, a room so vast it could swallow most people's entire houses, 70 feet long, 42 feet wide, ceilings 3 stories high. A massive fireplace carved from limestone dominates one wall. Above it, stone flags from every nation George has visited. Flemish tapestries, centuries old, hang from oak-paneled walls. George is 33 years old, thin, quiet, bookish in a family known for yachts and excess. He wears a simple black suit, no jewelry, no ostentation. This is the paradox of Biltmore. Built by the quietest Vanderbilt, the most intellectual. The one who read 8 languages and collected art not to impress others, but because beauty moved him. Unlike his brothers, who built marble palaces in Newport to prove their wealth and power, George built Biltmore for a different reason. He wanted to prove that beauty could outlast the fortune that created it, that architecture could be more than a symbol of power, that it could become something enduring. He's standing in the result of 6 years of obsessive work, 250 rooms, 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, 65 fireplaces, 4 acres of floor space, an indoor swimming pool with underwater lighting, revolutionary for 1895, a bowling alley in the basement, a gymnasium, a library with 10,000 books in 8 languages, cost $6 million. In today's money, $220 million. But that's just the house. Outside, 125,000 acres of land stretch into the mountains. George hired Frederick Law Olmsted, the man who designed Central Park, to transform North Carolina farmland into a managed forest. Olmsted planted over 1 million trees. He built roads that curved naturally with the landscape, designed gardens that bloom in sequence through all 4 seasons. George didn't want a showpiece. He wanted a living monument to what American ambition could achieve when it served beauty instead of ego. His family called it financial suicide, because in 1895, the Vanderbilt fortune, built by George's grandfather, Commodore Cornelius Vanderbilt, is the largest in America. Cornelius died in 1877, worth $105 million. That's over $2.5 billion today. He built that fortune with railroads, ruthlessness, and an iron will. His dying words were reportedly, "Keep the money together." But he didn't divide that fortune equally. Most of it went to George's father, William Henry Vanderbilt, who doubled it to $200 million before dying in 1885. William split the fortune among his 8 children. George's share? About $15 million. Sounds like a lot. And it is. But his older brothers got more, and they're spending it faster. Cornelius II built the Breakers in Newport, 70 rooms of Italian marble, gold leaf, and imported everything. A monument to power. William K. built Marble House, literally covered in marble with a gold ballroom that cost $7 million alone, a temple to excess. The Gilded Age is at its peak. Wealth is meant to be seen, displayed, weaponized. But George is different. He reads philosophy. He travels not to be seen, but to learn. He collects art because Renoir's brushstrokes make him feel something words can't describe. When he decided to build a home, he didn't want a palace that shouted his name. He wanted a sanctuary that would whisper to the future. Now, on Christmas Eve, 1895, he opens the doors. His mother is here, his siblings, a few close friends. They walk through halls lined with paintings by Renoir and Whistler, past a winter garden filled with orchids and palms, into a music room with a pipe organ George plays himself. Dinner is served: oysters, venison, roasted duck, champagne. Afterward, they gather in the library, George's favorite room. 2 stories of books, a painted ceiling, leather chairs by the fire. George stands by the window and looks out at the mountains. He believes this will last for centuries. He believes beauty, if built with enough care, can survive anything. He has no idea he has less than 20 years left, and that this house, this dream of endurance, will become the burden that defines his family for generations. For a while, everything works. 1898, George marries Edith Stuyvesant Dresser. She's 26. He's 36. Edith comes from an old respected family, but not a wealthy one. Her father was a Civil War general who lost his fortune in bad investments. She grew up in Paris and Newport, moving in the same circles as the Vanderbilts, but always aware she was on the outside looking in. She has a famous name, but an empty bank account. She knows what it's like to inherit legacy without the means to sustain it. She's educated, well-traveled, fluent in French and Italian. She met George in Paris, and they fell in love over books and art and long conversations about what mattered beyond money. When she first sees Biltmore, she's overwhelmed, not just by the grandeur, though it's breathtaking, but by something else. The fragility of it. She sees what George doesn't. This house is a living thing that requires constant feeding. It takes 40 full-time servants just to run the house. Maids, cooks, butlers, groundskeepers, electricians, plumbers, gardeners. A full-time staff of 80 people just to keep the estate functioning. Every year, Biltmore loses money, about $250,000 annually. That's nearly $9 million today. George pays for it out of his inheritance. But that inheritance, while massive, is not infinite. And unlike his brothers, George isn't making more money. Cornelius II runs railroads. William K. has investments, oil, shipping. George collects art and plants trees and believes forests are the future. Edith sees this. She doesn't say much. George is sensitive about money, defensive about his vision, but she keeps careful notes, budgets, plans. She's practical in a way George isn't. She loves him for his idealism, but she's terrified by his blindness to cost. This is the burden of marrying a dreamer. You inherit not just the dream, but the weight of keeping it alive when the dreamer is gone. Still, for now, life at Biltmore feels magical. 1900, Edith gives birth to their only child, a daughter, Cornelia Stuyvesant Vanderbilt. Born in the Louis XV room on the second floor, with mountains visible through every window, Cornelia grows up in a world most people can't imagine. She has her own pony, her own governess. She learns French, piano, horseback riding. She runs through halls most adults get lost in. Christmas at Biltmore becomes a tradition. The house is decorated with holly and pine. Gifts are piled under a 35-foot tree in the banquet hall. For 14 years, this is Cornelia's life. And for 14 years, George continues his quiet work. He opens America's first school of forestry on the Biltmore Estate, training young men in sustainable forest management. He hires Gifford Pinchot, who later becomes the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service, to oversee the forests. He experiments with crops, livestock, land management. He writes papers on forestry, hosts conferences, believes Biltmore can be a model for how private wealth can serve public good. He's trying to turn architectural ambition into legacy, to prove that a house this grand doesn't have to be a monument to ego, that it can be a laboratory for the future. But the money keeps draining. $250,000 a year. Every year. George doesn't worry. He believes the forests will eventually pay for themselves. He believes in patience, in long-term thinking, in the idea that vision justifies cost. He believes he has time. He's wrong. March 6, 1914, Washington, D.C. George Washington. Vanderbilt III dies suddenly following an emergency appendectomy. He is 51 years old. No warning. No time to prepare. No final instructions. One moment, he's planning the spring planting at Biltmore. The next, he's gone. Edith is 42 years old. Cornelia is 14. And Biltmore, this glorious, impossible house, is now hers. Not as a gift, as a burden. George is buried in a private ceremony on the estate, beneath a simple stone marker in a quiet corner of the gardens. No grand monument, no marble tomb. Nothing to rival the Vanderbilt mausoleums in New York and Newport. Just a modest stone with his name and dates. Even in death, George rejected excess. Hundreds of employees attend. Many of them cry. Because George wasn't just their employer. He was decent. Fair. He knew their names, their children's names. He treated the estate's workers as partners in his vision, not servants to his wealth. Now he's gone, and Edith has to figure out what happens next. She sits in George's office, now her office, and goes through the books. The reality is devastating. The estate employs 80 full-time staff. Annual operating costs, $250,000. George's estate at death, $15.5 million. In today's money, that's about $480 million. Sounds like a fortune, right? It is. But here's the problem. George's older brother, Cornelius II, died in 1899 worth $70 million. George spent his inheritance building and maintaining Biltmore. He poured everything into this house, these forests, this vision. There's enough left to keep the estate running, but only if nothing changes, and everything is about to change. This is the tragedy of architectural ambition. George built Biltmore to last forever, but he built it on a fortune designed for one generation. The house will outlive the money, and when that happens, vision becomes burden. Legacy becomes debt. Edith reads the letters from George's family. She hears the stories, and she realizes something terrifying. The Gilded Age is ending, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, inevitably, like a tide going out. 1914 to 1918. World War I. The war doesn't touch American soil, but it touches everything else. Labor costs rise. Coal prices soar. food prices double. Young men who once worked as groundskeepers and footmen enlist, or leave for factory jobs that pay 3 times what Biltmore can afford. Wealthy families across America start closing their country estates. Why? Because the world that created these palaces is disappearing. Income tax is introduced in 1913. Estate taxes follow. Suddenly, fortunes that seemed infinite are taxable, visible, vulnerable. In Newport, Rhode Island, summer playground of America's richest families, the cracks are starting to show. The Breakers, Cornelius II's masterpiece, is struggling. His widow, Alice, can barely afford the upkeep. She lives in just a few rooms. The rest sit empty, slowly deteriorating. Marble House, built by William K. Vanderbilt, sits mostly empty. Alva divorced William and moved to France. The house costs $30,000 a year just to heat, more than most Americans earned in a decade. On Long Island, the Vanderbilt Estate idle hour, once a symbol of unstoppable wealth, is already showing signs of neglect. Edith watches all of this happen. She's now in her early 40s. Cornelia is still a teenager. The estate is hers to manage, alone, and she understands something terrifying. Gilded Age estates were never designed to sustain themselves. They were designed to display power, to throw parties for 500 people, to host European royalty, to prove you'd conquered America. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Carnegies, they built these palaces during an era when there was no income tax, no estate tax, and fortunes felt infinite. But fortunes aren't infinite. And houses like Biltmore, with 250 rooms, acres of roof, miles of plumbing, forests, farms, and entire villages of staff, bleed money. $250,000 a year just to keep the lights on. That's sustainable when you're worth $70 million and making more. But what happens when the fortune shrinks? When taxes come? When the children inherit debt instead of dynasty? You sell, or you abandon it, or you tear it down. Between 1900 and 1950, America will demolish over 600 Gilded Age estates, houses that took years to build, gone in weeks. Marble columns sold for scrap. Ballrooms turned into parking garages. Entire wings left to rot. Even the Vanderbilts can't stop it. Edith stands in the library late at night, surrounded by George's books, his maps, his careful notes about forestry and sustainability. And she understands. George built Biltmore to prove beauty could endure. Now it's her job to prove vision can survive reality. She has a choice. Sell Biltmore now while it still has value, before the world changes completely, before it becomes a burden no one wants. Cash out? Walk away? Let someone else deal with the cost. Or fight to save it, knowing she might lose everything, knowing she'll have to compromise George's vision, knowing the dynasty may not survive. She thinks about George, about his dream, about the forests he planted, the school he started, the beauty he believed in. She thinks about Cornelia, about legacy, about what it means to hold on when everyone else is letting go. And she makes a decision. Biltmore will not be one of the houses that falls, even if it means transforming everything George built. Even if preservation requires betrayal. 1916. Edith makes a decision that shocks George's family. She's going to sell part of Biltmore, not the house, not the gardens, but the forest. 87,000 acres of land, more than half the original estate. George spent years managing this forest, planning it, protecting it. He believed it was the future of sustainable forestry in America. It was his laboratory, his legacy beyond the house. And now Edith is selling it. This is the moment private vision begins transforming into public heritage. The letters from George's siblings are brutal. How could you sell father's dream? This is a betrayal of everything George believed in. If you can't afford Biltmore, Sell the whole thing. Don't carve it up piece by piece. But here's what they don't understand. Edith isn't abandoning George's vision. She's adapting it to survive. She's selling the forest to the United States government for $5 per acre. Total sale, $435,000, about $12 million today. The land becomes Pisgah National Forest, the first national forest in the eastern United States. Why does Edith do this? Because she understands something George's siblings don't. The forest is worth more as a gift to the future than as a burden in the present. Maintaining 125,000 acres costs a fortune. Taxes, staff, road maintenance, fire prevention. But if she sells the forest to the government, turning it into protected public land, she accomplishes three things. She preserves George's vision. The forest will be managed sustainably exactly as he wanted. His forestry school's principles will guide its care. She generates desperately needed cash to keep Biltmore running. She proves that adaptation isn't betrayal. That legacy can evolve without dying. This is the beginning of a new model. Wealth transformed through necessity. Private ambition becoming public good, not by charity, but by survival. The sale brings in enough money to stabilize the estate for years, but it's not enough to save it forever. Edith never speaks publicly about what it costs her emotionally to sell that land. But Cornelia later remembers her mother standing at the window, looking out at the forests, crying quietly. "Your father planted those trees," she told Cornelia, "and now I've given them away." But she doesn't regret it, because the alternative, losing everything, would mean George's entire vision disappears. Better to sacrifice part of the dream to save the whole. This is the burden of stewardship. You don't get to keep everything. You have to choose what survives. Running Biltmore in the late 1910s is brutal work. Edith oversees everything. Staff schedules, now down to 60 employees. She had to let 20 people go, people she'd known for years. Budgets, every dollar tracked, every expense justified. Maintenance, the roof leaks constantly, pipes freeze in winter, the electrical system sparks and fails. Farming operations, dairy, livestock, vegetable gardens. Forestry, the remaining 40,000 acres still need management. She rises at 6 a.m., works until midnight, rarely takes a day off. She's not wealthy anymore in the way Vanderbilts are supposed to be wealthy. She's wealthy in burden, rich in responsibility, wealthy in legacy that won't let her rest. Cornelia watches her mother carry this weight, and she learns something George never intended to teach. Legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you fight for. And fighting for it means making choices the dreamer never had to make. 1924. Cornelia Vanderbilt is 24 years old, beautiful, educated, fluent in 3 languages. The heiress to Biltmore. She's been raised in a house that's equal parts fairy tale and financial nightmare. Every eligible bachelor in America and half of Europe wants to marry her. But Cornelia falls in love with John Francis Amherst Cecil, a British diplomat and the son of Lord William Cecil. He's handsome, charming, well-read. He shares Cornelia's love of history and architecture. And, importantly, he's not after her money. He has his own title, his own modest fortune, his own sense of duty. He understands what it means to inherit something bigger than yourself. They marry at All Souls Church in Biltmore Village on April 29th, 1924. The wedding is enormous. Over 1,000 guests. National press coverage. The ceremony is broadcast on radio, one of the first society weddings to reach a mass audience. The reception is held at Biltmore, the house decorated with thousands of azaleas and roses, orchestras playing in the banquet hall and music room, champagne flowing like water. For one shining moment, Biltmore feels like it did in George's time. Alive, vibrant, untouchable. Edith watches her daughter dance in the banquet hall, the same hall where George stood on Christmas Eve, 1895, and thinks, maybe we did it. Maybe we saved it. Maybe vision can survive after all. The mid-1920s are good to Biltmore. Cornelia and John have two sons, George Henry Vanderbilt Cecil, born 1925, William Amherst Vanderbilt Cecil, born 1928. The estate operates smoothly. The dairy farm is profitable. Tourism is starting to pick up. Small groups, by appointment, pay to tour the gardens. Edith is in her 50s now. She's held Biltmore together for over a decade. For the first time since George died, she allows herself to hope. Maybe the worst is over. Maybe the dynasty can survive the modern world. The 1920s feel like proof that adaptation works, that you can compromise without losing your soul. That legacy can evolve and still endure. But underneath the glamour, the same problems remain. Biltmore still loses money? Not as much, but it's still not self-sustaining. The roof still leaks, the walls still crack, the systems still fail. And across America, the Gilded Age estates are still falling, quietly, one by one. Edith knows this. She reads the reports. She hears the stories. But she pushes the worry aside, because right now, in this moment, Biltmore is alive. Then 1929 arrives, and everything collapses. October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashes. In a single day, billions of dollars of wealth vanish. Banks fail. Businesses close. Unemployment skyrockets to 25%. And across America, the final wave of Gilded Age estates begins to fall. Not slowly, not gradually, catastrophically. Between 1930 and 1950, over 600 Gilded Age mansions are destroyed. Let that sink in. 600 houses, each one a masterpiece of architecture, craftsmanship, and ambition, simply erased. Here's what happens. 1927. Cornelius Vanderbilt III's mansion at 640 Fifth Avenue in New York, demolished to make room for Bergdorf Goodman department store. One of the grandest houses in Manhattan, gone in weeks. The marble was sold, the furnishings auctioned. The Vanderbilt name replaced by a shopping destination. 1930s. William K. Vanderbilt's Idle Hour on Long Island, abandoned during the Depression. The family can't afford the taxes. By 1941, it's too expensive to maintain. Demolished in 1951 by dynamite. The wreckage cleared to make room for a subdivision. 1947. The Ochre Court in Newport. Built by Ogden Goulet in 1892 for $4.5 million. Sold to Salve Regina University for a fraction of its value. No longer a private residence. Now classrooms and dorm rooms. 1945 to 1980. Whitemarsh Hall in Pennsylvania. Built by banking heir Edward T. Stotesbury. 147 rooms, larger than Biltmore. Abandoned after his death. Too expensive to maintain. Too big to sell. Demolished in 1980 after sitting vacant for decades. Completely gone. Not even the foundations remain. Still standing, barely. Linwood Hall in Pennsylvania. Built by streetcar magnate Peter A.B. Widener. 110 rooms. Abandoned in the 1950s. Roof collapsed, windows shattered, vandalized. Still standing today, but rotting. Considered one of America's most endangered landmarks. Why does this happen? 3 reasons. Property taxes skyrocket. Before 1913, there was no income tax. Wealth was private, invisible, untouchable. After 1913, the government needs revenue. Big estates equal big tax bills. Suddenly, owning a palace costs more than maintaining it. Labor costs explode. Servants unionize. Factory jobs pay better. The Great Migration moves workers north. No one wants to work as a maid for $10 a week when they can earn $30 in a steel mill. Estates that needed 50 servants to function can't find 10. Cultural shift. The Depression changes how Americans view wealth. Massive private palaces start to feel obscene, out of touch, embarrassing. Symbols of greed and excess in an era of breadlines and dust bowls. Even the Vanderbilts aren't immune. The Breakers in Newport, Cornelius II's masterpiece, is only saved because his daughter, Gladys, leases it to the Preservation Society of Newport County in 1948 for $1 per year. It becomes a museum, open to the public. Private opulence transformed into public heritage, not by vision, but by desperation. Not because the family wants to share it, because they can't afford to keep it private. Marble House? Same story. Donated to the Preservation Society in 1963. These aren't homes anymore. They're monuments to a dead era. Proof that architectural ambition, without the means to sustain it, becomes burden. Edith watches all of this happen in real time. She's now in her 60s. Cornelia and John have moved to England with their sons. John prefers London, and Cornelia follows, leaving Edith alone. The estate is hers to manage. Again, alone. The bills keep coming. $250,000 per year in operating costs, unchanged since George's death, but now impossible to pay. Roof repairs, constant, emergency, staff salaries. She's had to cut another 30% of the workforce. People she's known for 20 years, people with families, taxes, rising every year, crushing. Revenue? Almost nothing. The dairy makes a little. The farm breaks even. But Biltmore is still hemorrhaging money. Edith receives offers almost weekly. Developers want to turn it into a luxury hotel. Resorts want to buy the land and demolish the house. One company offers to convert the estate into a tuberculosis sanitarium. Another wants to use it as a college campus. Every offer involves erasing George's vision entirely. She refuses everything. But at night, alone in that enormous house, she wonders, am I being selfish? Am I holding on to something that should die? Am I putting my own pride above practicality? She walks through the empty rooms, through the banquet hall where George hosted Christmas, through the library where he spent hours reading Dante in the original Italian, through the winter garden, now cold and silent. The house feels like a ghost, beautiful, haunting, unsustainable. Every room a reminder of George's genius. Every room a question. Can beauty survive when the money that created it is gone? This is the burden of inheritance. You don't just inherit the dream. You inherit the cost of keeping it alive. And sometimes, the cost is more than one person can bear. Edith sits at George's desk, her desk now, and writes in her journal, I am tired, so tired. The house is beautiful, and I love it still. But I wonder if love is enough. I wonder if George would forgive me for what I'm about to do. What she's about to do will shock everyone. It will be seen as betrayal by some, desperation by others. But for Edith, it's the only way forward. She's going to turn Biltmore into a business, not a museum, not a monument, a working, profitable estate that pays for itself. And she's going to do something unthinkable for a Vanderbilt. She's going to let strangers inside. 1930. Edith's first move is pragmatic. She expands the dairy operation into a commercial business. Biltmore Dairy Farms starts selling milk, butter, and ice cream locally under the Biltmore label. It's profitable. It employs local people during the Depression when jobs are scarce. And it starts generating real sustainable income. But it's not enough. 1932. On March 15, 1932, Biltmore House opens for public tours for the first time. Tickets, $2 per person, about $45 today. This is revolutionary. Gilded Age estates were private sanctuaries. You didn't let the public walk through your home. But Edith understands something her peers didn't. If people don't see it, They won't care if it disappears. The first year, a few thousand people come. They walk through the banquet hall, the library, the winter garden. They see the Renoirs, the tapestries, the pipe organ, and they fall in love. Imagine you're a school teacher from Asheville in 1933. You've driven past Biltmore your whole life, seen the house from a distance, heard stories, but you've never been inside. Now, for $2, you can walk through the front doors. You enter the grand staircase, 3 stories of carved oak and limestone. You see the winter garden, palms and orchids in the middle of North Carolina. You walk into the library and see 10,000 books lining the walls. And you think, this is ours now. This belongs to all of us. That shift, from private palace to shared treasure, is what begins to save Biltmore, not immediately. The revenue from tourism doesn't cover the costs yet. But it's a start. It's proof that people care, that beauty matters, that Biltmore can have a future beyond the Vanderbilt fortune. Edith doesn't live to see the full transformation, but she plants the seed. She proves that adaptation isn't betrayal, that opening the doors doesn't mean abandoning the dream. It means sharing it, transforming private opulence into public heritage, and that transformation will define Biltmore for the next century. 1942 to 1945, World War II. Biltmore plays an unexpected role in the war. In 1942, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. faces a problem. If the Capitol is bombed, America's greatest artworks could be destroyed, so they ship them to Biltmore. For 4 years, the most precious pieces of American art are hidden in the rooms George built. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, paintings by Gilbert Stuart, Rembrandt, and Van Dyck, 62 works total. Biltmore becomes a guardian, not just of its own history, but of the nation's. Workers carefully crate the documents. They're transported by train and truck through the night, stored in climate-controlled rooms, guarded around the clock. When the war ends and the artworks are returned to Washington, Biltmore's reputation transforms. It's no longer just a rich family's house. It's a symbol of American resilience, a protector of beauty in dark times. And that identity sticks. 1958, Edith Vanderbilt dies at the age of 85. She held Biltmore together for 44 years after George's death. Through World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, and the complete collapse of the Gilded Age, she never gave up. She sold the forest, she opened the dairy, she welcomed tourists, she made compromises George never would have made, but she saved the house. Now, Cornelia's sons, George Cecil and William Cecil, take over management. They're in their 30s, both educated, both practical, and they face the same question Edith did. How do you keep Biltmore alive without destroying what makes it Biltmore? Their answer is bold. Treat it like a business, but never forget it's more than that. 1960s to 1980s. George and William Cecil modernize Biltmore. 1960. They expand tourism. Advertise nationally. Build a visitor's center. Hire professional guides. Attendance, 100,000 visitors per year. 1971. They open Biltmore year-round, previously only spring and summer. They add Christmas events. The house decorated exactly as it was in 1895. Attendance, 250,000 per year. 1985. They open Biltmore Estate Winery, one of the most ambitious projects in the estate's history. They convert the old dairy barn into a winery, plant vineyards on the estate, hire French winemakers. It becomes one of the most visited wineries in America. Attendance, 500,000 plus per year. 1990s. They add the Inn on Biltmore Estate, a luxury hotel on the property. Host weddings, corporate events, concerts. Revenue, over $100 million annually. By the year 2000, Biltmore is fully self-sustaining. No government funding, no donors, just smart, patient management and a refusal to let go. But here's what's remarkable. The Cecil family could have taken shortcuts. They could have subdivided the land, sold off the art, turned the house into a theme park. They didn't. Every decision they made had one guiding principle. What would honor George's vision while ensuring Biltmore survives? They treated the estate as a living thing that needed to evolve, not a museum frozen in time. When they added the winery, they didn't just slap the Biltmore name on cheap wine. They hired experts, grew grapes on the estate, made wine that actually competed with California and France. When they built the hotel, they didn't put it next to the house. They built it a respectful distance away, designed to complement, not overshadow, the chateau. When they hosted events, they set strict rules. No amplified music in the house, no food in certain rooms, respect for the art and architecture. They understood something critical. Biltmore's value wasn't just in the building. It was in the integrity of the experience. People didn't come to Biltmore to see a tourist trap. They came to touch something real, something that connected them to history, to beauty, to a time when people believed craftsmanship mattered, and the Cecil family protected that. This is the difference between exploitation and stewardship. Exploitation extracts value until nothing's left. Stewardship grows value while preserving what matters. The Cecils chose stewardship, and it worked, 2000s to 2020s. Biltmore is a success by any measure. Over 1.4 million visitors per year. Revenue exceeding $300 million annually. A working winery, hotel, restaurants, and shops. But behind the scenes, the Cecil family faces challenges George Vanderbilt never imagined. Preservation costs are staggering. $1 million per year just for the roof. Another $500,000 for stonework. Climate control systems for priceless art and tapestries. Staff of over 2,000 employees, seasonal and full-time. Then there's the question of authenticity versus modernization. Visitors expect Wi-Fi, accessible bathrooms, air conditioning. But Biltmore is a historic landmark. Every change has to be carefully considered, approved by historians, executed by craftsmen who understand 19th century techniques. It's a constant balancing act. How do you preserve the past while paying for the present? Here's a challenge most people don't think about. Biltmore is still privately owned by the Cecil family. That means every time ownership passes to the next generation, estate taxes are due. In 2001, when William Cecil Sr. passed control to his son, the estate tax bill was estimated at $90 million. How do you pay that without selling? You can't. Not easily. The Cecils worked with the IRS to create a payment plan. They diversified revenue. They borrowed. They sold some peripheral land. But the threat is always there. One bad year, one failed negotiation, one change in tax law, and Biltmore could be forced into a sale. Let's be honest. The Cecil family could sell Biltmore tomorrow for $500 million plus estimated value. They could walk away, live comfortably forever. Why don't they? William A.V. Cecil Jr., current managing partner, explained it in a 2015 interview. This isn't just a house. It's a responsibility. My great-great-grandfather built something extraordinary. My great-grandmother saved it. My grandparents and parents grew it. I'm not the one who gets to let it die. That sense of stewardship, not ownership, but stewardship, is what keeps Biltmore alive. It's the understanding that some things are bigger than one person, bigger than one generation. Some things are worth fighting for, not because they're profitable, but because they're irreplaceable. Eerie. Plant vineyards on the estate. Hire French winemakers. It becomes one of the most visited wineries in America. Attendance, 500,000 plus per year. 1990s. They add the Inn on Biltmore Estate, a luxury hotel on the property, host weddings, corporate events, concerts. Revenue over $100 million annually. By the year 2000, Biltmore is fully self-sustaining. No government funding, no donors, just smart, patient management and a refusal to let go. But here's what's remarkable. The Cecil family could have taken shortcuts. They could have subdivided the land, sold off the art, turned the house into a theme park. They didn't. Every decision they made had one guiding principle. What would honor George's vision while ensuring Biltmore survives? They treated the estate as a living thing that needed to evolve, not a museum frozen in time. When they added the winery, they didn't just slap the Biltmore name on cheap wine. They hired experts, grew grapes on the estate, made wine that actually competed with California and France. When they built the hotel, they didn't put it next to the house. They built it a respectful distance away, designed to complement, not overshadow the chateau. When they hosted events, they set strict rules. No amplified music in the house, no food in certain rooms, respect for the art and architecture. They understood something critical. Biltmore's value wasn't just in the building. It was in the integrity of the experience. People didn't come to Biltmore to see a tourist trap. They came to touch something real, something that connected them to history, to beauty, to a time when people believed craftsmanship mattered. And the Cecil family protected that. This is the difference between exploitation and stewardship. Exploitation extracts value until nothing's left. Stewardship grows value while preserving what matters. The Cecils chose stewardship, and it worked. So here's the question we started with. Why did Biltmore survive when over 600 other Gilded Age estates didn't? 3 reasons. First, Edith Vanderbilt refused to be precious about the past. Most families treated their estates like sacred objects. They tried to freeze them in time, keep them exactly as they were, protect them from change. And those estates died because the world changed and they couldn't adapt. Edith Vanderbilt was different. She loved Biltmore, but she loved it as a living thing, not a monument. So she sold the forest to save the house, opened a dairy to generate income, welcomed tourists to share the beauty, let go of perfection to embrace survival. She didn't ask, what would George want? She asked, what will keep Biltmore alive? And that willingness to adapt, without abandoning the core values, saved it. Second, the land was part of the vision. Most Gilded Age estates were just houses on property. Biltmore was different. George didn't just build a chateau. He built an ecosystem. Frederick Law Olmsted's forests managed landscapes, sustainable farming, forestry schools. When the money ran out, the land kept giving. The forests produced timber. The farms produced food. The rivers powered mills. Even after Edith sold 87,000 acres, the remaining land was productive. Today, Biltmore still operates a working farm, a winery with grapes grown on site, gardens that draw visitors year-round, hiking trails through protected forests. The land isn't just scenery, it's infrastructure, and that makes all the difference. Third, the family never gave up. 4 generations, over 130 years. Every time someone could have sold, subdivided, or walked away, they didn't. Not because it was easy, but because they believed some things are worth the cost. Let's be clear, this wasn't romantic idealism. The Cecil family made hard business decisions. They took risks. They borrowed money. They worked 16-hour days. They didn't save Biltmore out of sentimentality. They saved it because they understood that Biltmore had become more than a house. It had become a symbol of what's possible when beauty matters more than ego, when craftsmanship is valued over speed, when people choose to preserve instead of demolish. In a world where most things are temporary, where buildings are torn down after 30 years, where trends change every season, where nothing seems built to last. Biltmore endures, not because it's too big to fail, but because people refuse to let it. 2025. Biltmore is the most visited historic house in America. 1.4 million visitors per year. A working winery producing 180,000 cases annually. The Inn on Biltmore Estate, a 213-room luxury hotel, 8,000 acres of protected land, 2,400 employees, largest private employer in Western North Carolina, annual revenue over $300 million, and it's still 100% privately owned by the Cecil family, George Vanderbilt's direct descendants. No government funding, no corporate ownership, no investors, just one family, 5 generations, refusing to let go. But Biltmore's survival is about more than one house. It's a mirror. It reflects what America lost and what we almost lost. Between 1900 and 1950, we demolished over 600 Gilded Age estates. We tore down the original Pennsylvania station in New York in 1963. We demolished Cornelius Vanderbilt's mansion on Fifth Avenue. Hundreds of estates that represented the height of American craftsmanship. Gone. We tore them down because they were expensive, old-fashioned, and impractical. And we lost to something irreplaceable. But Biltmore endures, not as a monument to wealth, but as a reminder of what's possible when we choose to protect beauty, not for profit, but for its own sake. Let's be honest about the complicated truth. Biltmore was built with privilege and excess. George spent a fortune most people couldn't imagine. He employed laborers who earned pennies compared to his wealth. The Gilded Age was an era of staggering inequality, of robber barons and exploitation, of wealth concentrated in the hands of a few families while millions struggled. We can acknowledge that. We should acknowledge that. But here's the other truth. Those laborers' work still stands. The stonemasons, the woodcarvers, the artisans, many of them immigrants, created something that outlasted the Gilded Age, the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and a century of cultural change. Their craftsmanship is still here. The limestone they carved by hand, the plaster they molded, the floors they laid, the gardens they planted, their work endures. And that matters. Because Biltmore isn't just about the Vanderbilts anymore. It's about everyone who built it, everyone who saved it, everyone who visits it today and feels something they can't quite name. Awe at the scale, curiosity about the cost, admiration for the resilience, a bittersweet reflection on wealth, time, and mortality. Today, you can walk through Biltmore's front doors and stand in the same hall George stood in on Christmas Eve, 1895. You can see the mountains he saw, touch the stone he touched, walk through the library where Edith made the hardest decisions of her life. You can visit during Christmas and see the house decorated exactly as it was 130 years ago. And you can understand what Edith understood. Some things are too beautiful to let die. Not because they're perfect, not because they're easy, but because they remind us what we're capable of building and what we're capable of saving. Biltmore didn't survive because it was too big to fail. It survived because people refused to let it. Because Edith chose adaptation over purity. Because the Cecils chose stewardship over profit. Because thousands of employees over 5 generations showed up every day to maintain something bigger than themselves. It survived because private vision became public heritage. Because architectural ambition transformed from symbol of power into symbol of endurance. Because one family understood that legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you fight to preserve. In an age when America's greatest fortunes were vanishing and the mansions of the Gilded Age were falling one by one, Biltmore refused to die. It stands today not as a monument to wealth, but as a testament to resilience. To the idea that beauty, when protected with enough determination, can outlast the money that created it. to the belief that some things, despite their cost, despite their burden, despite the easier path of letting go, are worth saving. And in a world where so much is temporary, fleeting, and disposable, that refusal is everything. George Washington Vanderbilt built Biltmore to prove beauty could endure. 130 years later, his great-great-grandchildren are still proving him right. Not because it's easy, but because some legacies are too important to abandon. Some dreams are too beautiful to let die, and some houses, against all odds, against all logic, simply refuse to fall. This is the story of Biltmore, the house that survived when every other mansion fell, the house that transformed private opulence into public treasure, the house that proved vision, when paired with adaptation, can outlast even the greatest fortune, and the house that reminds us all, in the end, what we choose to save defines who we are. N.E.